Well, today on our Tech for Business podcast, we're joined by Todd, our COO and CISO, and I believe this episode is coming out right before Halloween. So in our spooky season theme, we're talking about what keeps him up at night. All of those scary thoughts, nightmares. So Todd, with that question in mind, what comes up right away? What's kind of the first thought about keeping you up at night?
Sure. Insert the screams here. I'd say probably surprises is what I typically hear, and it's a little cliche. It's something that I used to hear a lot from CEOs in the past, and you don't hear it quite as much anymore. But I think it still resonates, and I can put a lot of things under surprises, and which is why I wanted to start there. So just as an example, I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't like, but I think ultimately what the concern is that sometimes there's the unknowns, right? Is really what I think it comes down to, and that it gets bucketed into surprises. And that could be anything from budgeting process. I didn't do the right job budgeting, and therefore when I got the new budget and the cost increased 10%, I didn't anticipate that. I can tell you for sure CFOs hate that. They do not like that in any shape, manner, or form. But it also includes a lot of other things too. So, for example, if you had a person on your team that was a superstar and they're now leaving the organization, the executive level typically is like, well, wait a second, what happened there? Did we know that they were looking? Did we try to retain them? Those kinds of surprises drive people crazy as well. But ultimately for me, the things that are really the near and dear for me is probably at the moment is security. And a couple reasons. I mean, when I first took over the role at CIT of leading the security team, everybody's security problems I tried to make my own, and it bugged me. It was hard for me because it typically was looked at more like as a sales process, whether it was my intent or not. And I was kind of trying to be in front of it going, hey, we got to stop this. And here's how. And people would go, yeah, I hear you, but we're too small, too big. We're too small. We're in the wrong industry. It just doesn't impact us. And the answer was, yeah, it does. And you'll see, unfortunately. So that was where things really started. Now it's shifted. I don't struggle with that nearly as much, partly because we do such a good job of being in front of it and helping people through the process with education and other things. But the things that tend to be the most scary, the things that keep me up are dumb things. I wake up for the stupidest reasons. It's just embarrassing. Uh, but what I hear from other people when we work with them, it tends to be the unknowns, right? So we have people talk to us all the time is, "Ooh, I don't even know what the next step is. You have to tell me what's coming. Where are we going? Why are we doing that?" Um, I was talking to a bank executives a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Hey, I understand we're in a bank and we do banking, and that's who we are, and that's what we know, and we're really good at it. And the biggest changes that we've seen over the last 5 years in banking is cybersecurity, and we know nothing about that. We need your help, and you've done a good job helping us through it, but we don't get it. We don't understand it. We don't
Mhm.
want to understand it. We just want to know what's coming and how we're going to deal with it." Those are kind of the overarching themes that I think that I hear as this just scares me. It's the unknowns and how do you get in front of that?
Yeah, I think, when you talk about cybersecurity and these unknowns and these surprises, it really comes down to that human need for safety. That's where that fear is really coming from is my business safe? Is my, data, the people that I'm serving, my customers, is that safe? Yeah, that can be really scary. And banking or healthcare or whatever you do, and your job is suddenly totally different. I never planned or trained to be a security professional, and now that's my job. That has to be so hard.
Right.
So it seems silly to say, like, how can businesses be proactive? Like, what can we do to combat surprises? How do you prepare for the unknown?
You talk to paranoid people like me.
We should have had tinfoil hats for this episode.
Uh, yeah, just kind of expand on it a little bit. I agree with you. It is terrifying. I think one of the other things is I think people are concerned of if I don't know the answer, how do I communicate it? How do I address it, et cetera? But to the question that you had, when it comes to what do you do with this? I think the answer to me is it is a lot of planning, unfortunately. Um, and while I joked and said talk to paranoid people, while I am paranoid, it's for good reasons. We are actually in the industry, so we see a lot going on and we see it across industry. So what ends up happening is we get a lot of experience. We get to see it in various industries, various group sizes, et cetera. But things tend to be very cyclical. So as the threats happen, they tend to happen very similarly for periods of time. And because we see that, you can kind of see what's next, if you will. And what we do is for most organizations is the planning piece. So you write your plan and say, hey, we're assuming there will be an incident. This is a great example. I mean, it's if you're in the security world or if you've paid any attention, everybody says it's not if, it's when. So if that's true, you should probably build the plan. We call it the incident response plan, and it's basically the guidebook of in case of fire, break glass, what does that look like? And so what the first thing you do is build that, and you can create a variety of different scenarios where we got phished, we got ransomware, we clicked on something we shouldn't, whatever. And then you start to test it, right? So inevitably what ends up happening, especially in the small to mid-sized organizations, is there's usually one person that's responsible for it. So this is going to be Ariel's responsibility. And I say, who's responsible? And they go, Ariel. And I go, okay, well, who's going to do this? Ariel. Who's going to do this? Ariel. And I say, okay, that's fine. We wrote the plan, but the next time we come through, we start to review the plan with the team and saying, we're just verifying that the plan is up to date, it's real, etc. And oh, by the way, Ariel went on vacation to Alaska and she's out at sea and has no internet connectivity. And they say, oh, no, no, no. Ariel's always available. I'm like, okay, but today she's not. Now what do you do? And then you get into the plan of, okay, well, our plan stinks. Let's revise. Now we need a backup. We need to rebuild it, et cetera. That's a good foundation of how do you start to plan for things. And then throwing curveballs in there by paranoid people going, well, what if this happened? You just had the backhoe dig up all your internet connectivity at your business. Sorry, now what? Um, there was road construction or somebody hit a street sign outside your building. Now what? And then you kind of continue to build those things out. Is it perfect? No, not at all. But it does get you into other things that make a lot of sense. And since I'm on a roll, I'm going to throw one more in here. Another good one is I'll use it as kind of a surprise as well is data backups or data recovery. Inevitably organizations now are doing a really, really good job with backups. A handful of years ago, not so great, but now really good job. There's a lot of great tools that do a wonderful job of validating that the backups work. You can get them, you can restore them. They're wonderful. The problem ends up being is that most organizations have a singular backup and they back up 50 devices to it. Well, what that looks like is a great, you have an issue, but very rarely do you see an issue that you get to back up just or restore one thing. So it's say, I'll use ransomware as an example. In a ransomware event, you almost lose everything. And so if you were trying to do your restore and you had 50 devices on one thing, you're looking at a multiple week restoration process. Not always, but in some cases. And if that's the case, that's going to be a big surprise to your leadership team, and they're not going to be super excited about it. So what does that look like? Again, you build a plan that says, well, we need to recover like this, and we want these 5 apps available within 24 hours. Cool. Now we can build a plan around that.
Yeah. When you talk about surprises and the unknown and all these things, what you're saying is, or what I'm hearing is, you need to control what you can control because it's going to cut down on how bad that potential surprise or unknown thing is going to be, whether that's getting tools in place or training in place. It's a little bit of the Boy Scout motto of always be prepared, learn how to tie your knots because you never know when you're going to need it and what you're going to need it for. If you kind of had to choose, I feel like I'm putting you in a hard place. If you had to choose when you're preparing for things, having the tools or having like the training, that human element versus the technical element, which is really more important when it comes to these unknowns.
Yes. You knew I was going to say that.
You can't say just yes. Of course, both are very important.
It is a little bit of a chicken and an egg scenario.
Yeah.
You have to have the tools. If you have the people, that's great. But if you don't have the tool to actually do the work, you're going to be dead in the water. Now, could you get the right people, build the right plan without the tools? 100%. So you could start there. Most people don't. They tend to go to the technical solution first because IT tends to do that. Hey, I've got this cool gizmo. It's wonderful. It's going to save the day. And then you go, okay, we have it. Now what? And more often than not, most organizations just move on. The building the plan piece is very people centric, and it does need to happen. Um, One of my semi favorite sayings currently is done is better than perfect, and perfect is better than done. So just starting is absolutely amazing. You got to start somewhere. And if you check off the list, yep, I got the backup, I put it in place, done. Absolutely amazing. Now it's time to revisit and come back, circle back. And then because the perfect is never done, you should circle back and say, okay, what's the next steps? So
Hmm.
there's my non-answer.
Thanks. That's great. As a C level who, you know, I'm asking what keeps you up at night and it's the surprises and the unknowns. What were kind of the steps that you took to make sure that you're getting rid of the stress? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, so I get to use my favorite security slash dad joke here is I sleep like a baby. I wake up every 10 minutes screaming. uh, it's a great question. I mean, I think what ended up happening for CIT is, or for me in particular, was I did have to find a way to say, ultimately, not every problem is mine. I can do the best
Mhm.
I can with being communicative. There it is. Um, and just being very clear on what I'm saying. And what that ultimately means is I used to try to communicate very much on the scary, here's all this risk communication. And while that's
Mhm.
good, it wasn't enough to kind of close the gap. It can't just be risk. It also has to be risk and reward.
Mhm.
There's also this other saying that I've heard fairly often, which is be brief, be brilliant, be gone. And trying to adopt those kinds of communication styles helps a lot too, is how can I tell you all this information, make it very clear, very concise, to a C level, because that's typically the decision makers, and then just get out of the way and let it go. So ultimately, for me, what ended up happening was partly I let it go. The risk was theirs. I communicated it. I did what I could, and then they get to make the decision. However, being me, I took it a bit further. We have most of our customers on a lot of our managed products and managed offerings. And what we did is we just built the offering the way it should be. And then we just said, here, you get this.
Mhm.
And we basically
Do
just
this
rolled
thing.
it. Yeah, we just
Yeah.
rolled it out that way and said, here, you just get this. And then after a couple of years, we started to go open up the curtain, the man behind the curtain, if you would, and said, hey, actually, there was a reason why we did this. And
Mhm.
here's what it is. If you're looking at your security journey, here's where you stand on that journey. So it was a lot of communication, but it was also building the plan. Here is the plan. Here's the technology, the people, the process, everything that gets it. And whether you knew it or not, you were really going where you needed to go. That's ultimately what allowed me to sleep was I'm just going to do it for you. And boy, I sure hope you do it. But it did make a huge difference. And it does make a difference for me as well as for a lot of our customers. So hopefully that's going well for others out there as well.
I'm sure it is. As we sort of wrap up a little bit, we've got kind of a short episode, and I want you to be able to share anything that you would like. Uh, do you feel that businesses are coming around more to the needs of their technology, their cybersecurity, this preparation for this unknown? Are they fully understanding that nowadays, or do you think it's the same as it used to be, where people are just blind or just unprepared?
Um, Overall, I would say most organizations do have a strong understanding. Some of them are reluctant, but they do understand. So things that have made a significant change, while we're trying to do our part, what's really driven a lot of it has been the insurance industry, which isn't really
Mm.
a surprise if you listen to any of our other podcasts. But the fact that they're forcing organizations, in order for us to underwrite it, we need you to reduce your risk. The way you reduce your risk is doing X, Y, and Z. That's been the biggest driver on change, in my opinion. There are still a few organizations out there that are a bit behind. Um, Depending on where they land, those organizations, unfortunately, it probably does fall into the category. If it's not if, it's when. And when happens, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, shoot, we didn't like that. Can you help? So those are the big ones. I do think it is getting a lot better, and I mean significantly better, but there are still plenty of organizations that could probably use some assistance.
For sure. And, I said it on other podcasts that a conversation is free. I recommend reaching out to someone. It could be us, it could be a different service, but just reach out and make sure that you've got the things in place that you need. Anything else you'd like to share about our Bump in the Night podcast?
Yeah, not really. I think we did it really well. I mean, ultimately, again, I think communication is a big thing. And
Hmm.
so, like you said, is the communication's free. Start there.
Hmm.
Obviously, we're around if you want to talk. We like to do it, but just starting to talk, starting to plan, that'd be the way I go. And again, the more planning, the more talking you do, the more prepared you tend to be.
Yeah. And I mean, education is so important, but Todd can also just give you a package that does it all for you. Like we can just tell you what you need.
Correct.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this topic, please let us know. Like, subscribe, or reach out to us at info@cit-net.com or head out to our website, cit-net.com/podcast. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.